Hi, everybody in Psych 267, Forensic Psychology. Scott Silberman here again. Today we cover, I should say this week, we cover two chapters, 9 and 10, because they're both relatively short and they kind of do go together. By the way, I've had experience working in both of these areas that we're going to talk about this week. Hey, maybe that's why they have me teach this class, huh? I've done pretty much all these things that are in this book as far as work in forensic psychology. Even though divorce and custody things are not my favorite, I do like things that involve police, corrections, juvenile delinquency, and some of these chapters that will be coming up here soon. So let's start with this one, police and correctional roles for forensic psychologists. Here we go. Police psychology. Now, over 90% of police departments have psychologists working there, either full-time or part-time. Most of the time, it's part-time work. You get paid by the hour, but some of them have full-time psychologists, so that's one thing that I want you to know. If you are full-time, it's known as in-house. That's what you're called. You have an in-house job, and that's different than if you just get paid to show up by the hour whenever they need you. Pre-employment screenings, these are the kinds of things that psychologists do. Quite often, there are more than that, but that's a common thing. They want to know who's going to make a good police officer and maybe who will not. That is a very typical role for a psychologist. However, there are more. This paragraph here, starting with in addition to. There's other things too, like scheduling. Some police departments have 4 10-hour shifts for officers on duty, and others have 5 8-hour shifts per week. What about the kind of person who should work overnight versus during the day? There's so many things to look at with scheduling. Educating officers on how to deal with their own stress, how to deal with stressful situations in their jobs, anger management, dealing with mentally ill and disabled people. How do they handle those situations? Because they do encounter people like that quite often. Also, critical incidents, excessive use of force, shootings, police suicides. There are so many things that police departments have to deal with, and psychologists get involved in them too. Fitness for duty. Yeah, they can determine medically if you're ready to go back to work or even fit for duty in the first place. But what about psychologically? And also special unit evaluations. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes as well. So, critical incidents, tragedies, deaths, bomb threats, hostage situations. We need to know what kind of officers have the psychological makeup to handle those kinds of situations effectively before they are put into that kind of work. Sometimes you are asked to be more like a therapist, counseling services for officers and their families. Now that brings up a good point that we need to talk about. You can't be friends with people that you work with if this is your job, because you might have to do counseling with somebody, or you might have to make a decision about that person's fitness for duty. So you don't want it to be like your best friend or somebody that you're dating. That could be a problem. All right, I don't know why there's a blank page here. In your reading packet, I imagine you paid for that blank page. Go get your 5 cents back. No, I'm joking. I don't know why that happened here. Fitness for duty. Just like it sounds and just like we said, are you ready psychologically? We're not medical doctors, we're psychology doctors. Are you ready to handle the tasks that are needed to either go back to work or to be employed in the first place? What about evaluating people if they should be on special units like the SWAT team, special weapons and tactics, HNT, hostage negotiation teams? We need the right people in police departments on those types of assignments. So, moving right along here, correctional psychology. I actually had a job as a prison psychologist. It was a women's prison that does not exist anymore. They moved the ladies who were there, either released them or moved them to other facilities. But I had a job as a prison psychologist. Here's what I want you to know. First of all, the good and the bad about it. You ready? There are plenty of jobs out there, and they're usually full time, and they have good benefits. There's over 3,000 full time psychologists who work in prisons. They, will give you usually insurance for you and your family and days off that are paid. And there's, holidays that if you don't have to work on that holiday, you'll get to take it a different day and still get paid. So, a lot of job security too. No matter who's in charge of the state or the country, Republicans, Democrats, or otherwise, most people see a need for corrections, don't you think? We need prisons, we need people to work at them, so it is kind of a safe long-term job. However, what's the downside? It's stressful. There's too many emergencies. Just when you think you're going to go home, something happens and you have to stay even longer. So if you have young kids or you're a single parent or both, that could be a problem, huh? A lot of times you can't leave when you want to leave or when you're supposed to leave. Um, it can be stressful and even dangerous at times. They try to keep you as safe as possible, but those are things to consider. So look here, that number over 3,000, like I told you, in 2010 at least, that was the number. What do you do as a prison psychologist? Daily rounds. You have to go visit with people, inmates and staff members, usually every day that you're working. Mental health screenings of the inmates, of what kinds of psychological problems they have. Emergencies, like I said, emergency duty, it comes up a lot where there's an emergency. And oh my goodness, it can disrupt your day and your week. No doubt about it. Intakes. When new inmates come in, you have to help assess them for level of dangerousness and psychological problems. Court-ordered assessments is the person going to trial, and you need to do some kind of assessment with them before they go. So that is what we have for the first chapter, chapter 9 for this week. Look at this, another blank page. I don't know if I'm just getting this or it's in your reading packet too. Here's section 10, one page later. Trial consultation. In my career as a psychologist, I have not done this quite as often, only several times ever, but I have. Consulting for a criminal trial or even a civil trial if it's about money. Remember that, I think, from the last test? Anyway, trial consultation. Here's what I want you to know. First paragraph. Rarely is this full-time work. Usually you are a part-timer and they pay you by the hour. Now, the good news, that doesn't usually come with benefits like health insurance or paid days off, but they pay you a lot more per hour because of that. You could make $100 or $200 an hour for being a trial consultant as a psychologist. So there's a lot of people, if they can get enough work, they will make some good money, no doubt about it. Who gives you your work? It could be the court. It could be somebody who just knows you. But right here, the attorneys, that's usually who contacts you. So it's a good idea to get to know attorneys who trust you and believe in your work. Now, here's what it says. This has been different than my line of work, but still, I've dealt more with criminal stuff. 95% of it is civil. Somebody is suing for money, and they want to prove that the person either is or is not in need of money, and they will hire a psychologist to be an expert witness. Somebody was hurt or traumatized. Is that worth money or is it not? And if so, how much? Now, psychologists might be asked to help get a jury seated. First of all, there's a term called voir dire, speak the truth. You interview people who are called for jury duty, By the way, has that ever happened to you yet? If not, it probably will. You can try to get out of it, but they seem to catch up with you eventually. And then you show up on the day that you're supposed to, and they ask you all kinds of questions. Well, the prosecution and the defense, or even if it's a civil trial, it wouldn't be a whole lot different. They will want certain people on the jury and maybe want to eliminate other people. The lawyers, the attorneys, can make a challenge. So let's go over these real quick. There's a challenge for cause, and that means you don't want somebody who's part of the jury pool, somebody that you're interviewing, because you believe that person would be biased and unfair. Then you have the peremptory challenge. That's a little different. You don't have to give the judge a specific reason. You can just say, I don't want that person on this jury. If it's the way they're smiling or whatever, you don't have to have a specific reason. Now, last kind of challenge I want you to know about. It can get complicated. Makes you feel like you're in law school, huh? Bastion challenge, that's when you're challenging the other attorney's challenge. You might say, wait a minute, that's the third black person that you're eliminating. I think that you're being biased. So kind of challenging the other attorney's challenge, it can happen, and it does happen. Post-jury selection variables, next topic. After the jury is seated, you still might need to be a consultant for a whole bunch of different reasons. Demographics and social status and things like that they might want you to help assess even once there is a jury. Helping to prepare a witness, that's important too. The person needs to seem credible and knowledgeable and truthful. Now, psychologists as expert witnesses, yes, we do that too. We testify as expert witnesses. You might remember that from the first chapter. And it's important that we seem like experts, just like it sounds. False confessions. This did not come up in a court case until 1936. This was horrible. A man was beat by police officers into confessing to a crime that he didn't commit. This was very much a racial issue, by the way, but this has come up in all kinds of different ways lately. This court case I want you to know about, the one that started it, Brown versus Mississippi in 1936, police violence cannot be used as a reason for a confession to be admitted in court. That sounds ridiculous, but that had to be decided in a court case, even a unanimous Supreme Court decision. Sometimes people confess for other reasons. First of all, get to know this one. It happened in Arizona. In fact, it's called Miranda versus Arizona. You're not told that you have any rights when you get arrested, that you have the right to remain silent, the right to have an attorney, even if you can't pay for one. I bet you've heard of all of that, right? But maybe you didn't know that your Miranda rights is an Arizona case. And this man was having his conviction overturned in the 1960s for a horrible crime that he committed. By the way, if you're a believer in karma, he ended up getting his consequence in a different way. He didn't live much longer after that, but still, this was a landmark case that you make a confession, it's not considered a valid confession unless your rights were read to you and you know that you have rights. So that's what we talk about here with the aftermath. There's been all kinds of things like New York City Central Park case of, making people confess. In Arizona, there was a case like this where the Temple murders, you might have heard of that in the 1990s, kind of a forced confession. Another one in California, a 14-year-old boy was kind of forced into confessing that he killed his sister. And he even said, I'm only saying it because it's what you want to hear. They didn't let him go to the bathroom or sleep or eat for many hours at a time. There's all kinds of things that need to be considered. Now, voluntary confessions. What if none of that bad stuff happened and a person still confesses, but not for the right reasons? Some people just want to be compliant and make the police officer happy. Other times, the person is mentally ill and they believe that they did something and it didn't really happen that way. That's called an internalized false confession. There was one in the news not long ago with the little girl, the um, pageant princess, Jean Benet Ramsey, who was killed, and a man confessed to it, and he turns out he had nothing to do with it. He wasn't even in Colorado when it happened. So, these are important things to know. Elizabeth Loftus is a psychologist, speaking of expert witnesses, who has made her reputation on how faulty memory can be. She's the one who did the classic studies that you probably learned about in Psych 101 that you can actually get people to remember something, distort their memory by telling them details of it, and then they think they remembered it even if they weren't even there. State-dependent memory. Our memories are dependent on our state of mind at the time that something happened. If you were really angry one day and then you were witness to a crime, you might remember it better the next time you feel that level of anger. Next thing, what about race? It's not an uncomfortable thing to talk about if you're discussing it scientifically. If you're just being racist or race biased, that's not good. But this study from 2001, looking at 39 different research articles, found that people are 1.5 times more likely to be inaccurate when they're identifying somebody of a different race compared to same race identifications. So if I'm a white person and I have to say, oh, who was that black person or Native American person or whatever who committed this crime? Look at these pictures. I'm 1.5 times more likely to be wrong if it's a different race than my own. Last thing, post-trial data and information, I guess I would say. Debriefing is what I want you to know. It's very common that a psychologist will be asked to participate in a court case in this way. After the trial is over, no matter who wins or loses, who's prosecuted or not prosecuted, you might be paid to come back and interview those people on the jury and see what they were thinking so that the attorneys can learn from it for next time what went right and what went wrong in their role as an attorney within the court case. So, lots of different ways for psychologists to be involved in forensic settings, and the ones we've talked about this week: police, corrections, and trial consultation. And this ends with a little comic of the jury can't even decide on what kind of pizza to order. See you next time.